Welcome to All Grown Up Now, a tale of retail, relocation, revenge, reinvention, reckless behavior, really good clothes, indiscretion, infidelity, domestic violence, and one kidnapping. I'm Kenneth D. King, podcasting from my studio near Union Square in New York City. This podcast is another in a series of installments from a novel I wrote called All Grown Up Now, A Friendship in 3 Acts, available on Amazon.com. It's the story of a small-town boy who dreams of being a grown-up and his journey to get there. Each week, you'll hear another installment of this story. I am pleased to announce that BearWorldMagazine.com will be one of the sponsors of all of the episodes going forward. In the last episode, Ken brought Mark to San Francisco. Sadly, that didn't stop the harassment from Victor. He just did it aided by the new technology, the fax machine. Episode 25, When Going Commando Doesn't Mean You're Missing Your Underwear. The time, June of 1995. The place, San Francisco. A month or so after Mark got to San Francisco, he found an apartment right across the street. He felt he wanted to be close to me for safety's sake. It was convenient, and I too felt I could keep an eye on him. And my doggie Daisy could go visit Uncle Marky easily. She loved her Uncle Marky already. When he moved in, the place was painted the most ghastly color, a cross between Pepto-Bismol pink and lobster orange. Walls, trim, and ceilings all were painted this vile color. The previous tenant who we met was a bit peculiar. I thought we'd have to rip out the blaster to get rid of this hateful color, as it bled through 2 coats of good paint, but finally, after coat 3, we were able to subdue it. Then there was the issue of furniture, or lack thereof. Great, here I am with a place to live, and not even a chair to sit on, Mark said sadly, after looking around at all the new paint. All he had then was the futon he had been sleeping on, which my friend Merrill had given him. Not to worry, this neighborhood is great for abandoned furniture, I exclaimed enthusiastically. Until it got all fancy and they started calling it Hayes Valley, this neighborhood was known as part of the Western Addition and, therefore, a slum. When it became Hayes Valley, the quality of the abandoned furniture declined drastically. I could see Mark's nose turn up a millimeter at the idea of actually owning abandoned furniture. He raised the eyebrow, as I took to calling it, and looked somewhat horrified. Now don't worry, you'll see, I protested. And don't get all snobby, you'll have furniture in no time. Which we did, to Mark's astonishment. Within 2 weeks, he had a sofa from the freeway on-ramp across the street, an easy chair and kitchen table from my friends Merrill and Jennifer, kitchen chairs, a neighbor sent them over, a nice occasional chair, the sidewalk, and a bed, an early birthday gift from me. Another friend of Jennifer's contributed several bolts of unbleached cotton canvas scavenged from a store going out of business, which did well for making window treatments and slipcovers. When it was all done, Mark was astonished. His place looked like a chic on a budget spread in Apartment Living magazine. All that was missing was the art on the walls and all his personal things. Which was a problem. Victor wasn't going to let Mark come get his things. He claimed that Mark gave him everything, and therefore Mark had nothing to come get. This we first learned from one of the many faxes, and Mark confirmed it during a phone call to Vic from my studio with me listening on the extension. All of Mark's portfolios of work, art supplies, the remainder of his art collection sadly diminished by years of selling things off, his clothes, his lalique, everything, it was all in Victor's possession. Vic was using it all as a bargaining chip to get Mark back. Mark, this is terrible, I said. Just pretend there was a horrible fire. You have a choice between things and your freedom. You can make more art, you can get more things. The family heirlooms are painful to lose, but if you pretend there was a fire, it may make it a little easier. After all, living with Victor was hell, wasn't it? And hell has fire. So time went on, and Mark got settled in his new place. Mark had to have a job. I helped him with a resume, but it was very difficult to make it sound coherent. There were too many long, unexplained gaps and too many jobs in too many locations that were left after a few months. Mark was trying for a position teaching art, as he had taught art in a community college in Boston many years before. But the resume, however creative I was, just didn't support it. Eventually, he answered an ad for catalog sales for Williams-Sonoma and got hired. He worked the telephones, selling upscale goods to bored people at all hours of the night. Mark called me late one night, freaked out. Victor had met him at the door to his apartment building when he came home from work. It was about 3 a.m, and no doubt Victor had been up there carousing. We lived near a sex club, which closed at 2. Now, I prefer not to say how I know that. This visit started a higher level of craziness because Vic had now come on to Mark's turf. The phone calls continued in earnest, filling my answering machine up with crazy messages to Mark about how he had better come back or else. I had quite a file of answering machine tapes. I ended up buying them in bulk, which the people at QAV advised us to save just in case. It finally came to the point where Mark was advised to get a restraining order. Since I had taken basic business law in college, it fell to me to write the statement requesting the restraining order. Mark could be his own counsel at the hearing, but he needed a statement. So, one Sunday afternoon, we hammered it out. As an afterthought, I put in the statement a request for police protection for Mark to go get his belongings. The next day, he went down to the courthouse to file it. A restraining order, I discovered, is not worth the paper it's printed on. It works with civilized people who respect the law, but these people rarely need restraining. The crazy people, who it is supposed to protect against, are too crazy to care about any negative consequences of violating the law, and by the time they are busted, they have managed to do some damage. Restraining orders are not bulletproof, nor do they come with bodyguards. But it's the best the law can do, we were told. Cold comfort for someone fearing for his life. The day finally came in the early summer when Mark and I went to the courthouse to deal with the hearing. Jennifer, Mark's counselor from QAV, was there for moral support and advice as well. Mark was scared that Victor would show up, but thankfully, Vic sent a lawyer and stayed home. I was genuinely nervous as well, but felt a little better when the judge came in. She was wearing a Star Trek badge on her robe. This was a good sign, I thought. The hearing got underway, with Mark pleading his case and Victor's lawyer scoffing and denying everything. One point of contention was Mark's request that Victor's guns be taken away as they posed a danger to him. Victor's lawyer claimed that Vic needed the guns for his security business, which was burglar alarms, not guarding property. The judge went out of the courtroom to deliberate, then came back with her decision. Restraining order granted, but without the restriction on the guns, as Mr. Smith needs them for his business. I could see Mark blanch at that. Grant permission to let plaintiff go into the apartment with police protection to get his belongings. A murmur ran through the crowd. One lady next to me remarked at how unusual that was. Later, I realized that, in the statement I wrote, it wasn't clear that the apartment was in West Hollywood, which would have been out of her jurisdiction. Victor's lawyer was indignant, but signed off on the documents presented to him. As Mark, Jennifer, and I were leaving, I stopped Victor's lawyer. I said, "We will be calling you tomorrow morning at 9 to set up a time to go get Mark's things." With that, the three of us left the courthouse feeling like winners. After a light breakfast at the cafe the next morning, biscotti and coffee actually, Mark and I went to my studio to call the lawyer. As Mark talked, I listened on the extension. The guy wasn't very nice, nor did he want to make things easy. Mark asked, when could we go get his things? "Well, I'm going to file an injunction in court tomorrow to separate this part of the decision from the restraining order, so you're just going to have to wait. He had a snotty tone that implied, "You stupid faggot," which pissed me off. I'm one of those people who makes friends slowly, but once someone is my friend, if you mess with them, you've messed with me. That this shithead took that tone with Mark, well, that was enough to get me mad. Fighting words for sure. Even before Mark hung up the phone, I had a plan. When Mark hung up, he looked at me and he looked like he was going to cry. "Hey," I said, "he's going to court tomorrow." "Yeah," Mark sighed. "So we're going to court today. Get your coat. Let's go." Down to the courthouse we ran, and to the courtroom where we were the day before. Thankfully, the clerk, who plays on our team, so to speak, was there, and he remembered us. "He's going to get some sort of injunction," Mark said. "I cannot give you any legal advice, but you do have a valid court order," the clerk said evenly. "But he's going to file—" "I cannot give you any legal advice, but you do have a valid court order," the clerk said again, a little more pointedly. Doing my best Eve Arden, I perched on the corner of his desk, leaned over real close, smiled, and said, "So, doll, if we just flew down today and showed up at the U-Haul, this thing'd work?" "I cannot give you any legal advice, but you do have a valid court order," he said brightly, slightly nodding and smiling at me all the while. "Thanks, doll. You've been most helpful," I said as I pinched his cheek. "Come on, Mark, let's go." As we walked briskly out of the courthouse, Mark looked bewildered. "What are you up to?" he asked. I stopped and looked at him and said, "Correction, what are we up to? We have a court order, a credit card, and 24 hours. We need to get busy." We got to the airport at noon after arranging for a U-Haul truck and a rental car to be waiting when we arrived in L.A. While we sat at the gate waiting for the plane, I noticed that Mark had gone completely white. Now, it didn't take too many smarts to realize what was going through his head. He was going back into the Chamber of Horrors. I was concerned because I needed him to be present. I couldn't pull this off alone. Besides, I must confess, I was feeling like I'd gotten in over my head. I had to think of something, and fast. "Okay, Mark, we're in a movie," I said. "In this scene in the movie, we're going to get this guy's stuff. Now, in the movie, you're Antonio Banderas, and I'm Brad Pitt." Mark looked at me and arched the eyebrow. Right then, I knew he was going to be okay. "All right, so I'm Tom Hanks," I shouted. "But we're in a movie." As we were landing at the Burbank airport, the flight attendant announced, "The temperature in Burbank today is 108 degrees. Welcome to the Los Angeles area." Welcome indeed. "Well, we're going into hell, so it figures it'll be hot," Mark said. We got the rental car from the airport and went to the U-Haul place. When we got there, Mark and I split up. While I was signing the papers and such, Mark was chatting up the day laborers to get some help. Since the police were going to be involved, he made sure not to get any guys who might be wanted by immigration. Thankfully, I had gone to the ATM to get a big wad of cash. I was sure these guys wouldn't take any checks. With all that done, Mark called the West Hollywood Sheriff's Office to tell them what we were up to. We then went to the apartment, Mark in the rental car with the laborers, and me following, driving the big truck. We waited in front of the apartment building until the cops arrived. While we were waiting, The leader of the laborers asked me, "Hey man, what's going on?" "You know, there are times when it's better not to know," I said. "Yeah, this is one of them. When this is over, you guys never saw us. You'll get lost fast. Get it? You'll get paid well, and you'll piss off." "Okay, man." The sheriff arrived about 3:10. Mark went over to talk to him and to show him the court order. "I can give you only 15 minutes, the cop said, bored. "Then you're on your own." "You can't do that," I insisted. "This guy is crazy, and he has guns. He has lots of them." The cop perked up to that. The local cop in my neighborhood told me once that if you say to a cop that someone has guns, he'll get a hard-on and call all of his friends to come see. And that's exactly what happened. Within 3 minutes, there was another cop car parked in front of the building and 4 officers at our service. We all went into the building, Mark taking 2 of them to the back entrance, and the other 2 going up with me to the front door. They knocked with the usual, "Police, open up!" Nothing. They knocked again. Nothing. We could hear Victor moving around inside. "Break the door down," I demanded. "We can't do that," one of the officers said. "Why not?" "You have a court order to be escorted in. If he doesn't open the door, you're out of luck." "No fucking way," I said. "That's the way it works." "Well, what if I broke the door down?" "Well, then we'd have to arrest you for breaking and entering," he said, patiently. "So if he doesn't open the door, we're screwed." "Yeah," he said. Oh, god damn, that made me mad. I had just ripped through God only knows how much money on my credit card, and there was no fucking way I was going to leave empty-handed. I had gotten this far, and I wasn't giving up now. "Victor, you spouse-beating son of a bitch, you open this door," I shouted repeatedly while pounding loudly on the door, making as much noise as possible. If nothing else, I wanted to make a stir that would attract as much attention as possible from the neighbors. Bullies don't like people to pay attention. They might be witnesses later. So I continued pounding and yelling until we all heard a lock clicking. One officer got on his radio. "He's opening up." And after 3 more locks clicked, the door swung open. At which point, both cops drew their guns, pushed me aside, very reality TV, and stuck the guns in Victor's face. They grabbed him and pushed him up against the wall to frisk him. Mark came around with the other 2 officers, and we all got inside. What a fright this place was. It looked like an insane wild animal lived there. There was debris at least a foot deep on the floor. A scrawny black cat scampered about. From the smell of things, the cat had used the entire apartment as a litter box. Mark told me later that the former tenant performed animal sacrifices in that apartment. Why am I not surprised? 2 of the dining room chairs were in splinters, and there were stacks of moldy, unwashed dishes, including Mark's expensive block china, which he left behind because it looked so thoroughly revolting. The office looked as if someone had pulled everything out of the filing cabinets in a rage and threw it around like confetti. Mark started apologizing to everyone about how the place looked. It seems he had cleaned it one last time before he left, until I reminded him to keep on task. We weren't here to do a spread for Architectural Digest. Even more frightening was how Victor looked. He was my height and usually outweighed me by at least 30 pounds, but today his skin hung on him like saggy underwear. He looked obviously ill, and for a brief moment I thought that he might have AIDS. I was alarmed for Mark. As with all his other troubles, to have to worry about that one as well. Oh, man. Vic demanded to call his lawyer. Now, I wasn't too worried at this point. It was 3:30 p.m., and by the time he got the lawyer on the phone and rallied the guy to actually get to the courthouse to do something, it would be too late, and we would be gone. Happily, though, my mental calculations were unnecessary. Vic got the guy's answering machine. Touchdown. I started with telling the laborers what to take out and filling boxes as fast as I could. The leader was a real godsend. He had obviously done some of this before and kept the other two hopping, packing the truck like a pro. At one point, I looked up to see 8 officers in that apartment. It took me by surprise, but one of them told me that they had discovered armor-piercing bullets, which are very illegal, in one of the guns. And here they were, sweltering in 108 degrees, with bulletproof vests on, no doubt wanting to do some serious harm to Viktor. I gave them all something cool to drink, turned up the air conditioning, and even turned on the big screen TV for their viewing pleasure. The main cop came out and said to one of the others, "We can't find all the guns registered to this creep. That means they're hidden somewhere around here. We can't leave until they're finished packing because he could still be dangerous." Such a comfort. The laborers and I packed up Mark's things, and Mark dealt with Viktor and the police. Mark showed the police where the video cameras were hidden. One was in the thermostat that was directly in front of the front door, and the recorders were in the hall closet, and he showed them the fake clock where Vic hid the Beretta with no safety, Mark discovered. It was a wild afternoon. I'd love to see the videos of it. I know they exist somewhere. At one point, one of the officers asked me, "How do you know what's your friends and what's the other guy's?" "See this lovely piece of Lalique crystal? That's my friends. See that photo of the naked man with the erection? That's the other guy's." I know Mark's taste. He would never display a picture like that. "I see. Well, now I have to get back to work," I said as I raked off a table full of Mark's elephant collection into a box. Not a time for idle conversation. I made sure not to take anything that looked remotely like something Viktor owned. It was easy to tell what was his. If I had questions, I asked Mark, so there was a lot of stuff left when we finished up. We didn't take the big furniture like the living room, the dining room, and the bedroom furniture, or the big screen TV. What Mark wanted was his art collection, his portfolios, his family heirlooms, his books, his things. Viktor was left with more than enough to keep him living there. The laborers and I were finishing up when I heard Mark get loud with Viktor. "Where's the silver?" he demanded. "Viktor, where's the silver?" I heard Viktor mumble, "Ken, let's look out in the garage. His car is a beat-up BW Bug." Sure enough, the silver was out in the car. Viktor had some story about bringing it back from a friend's house, but it was obvious that he was in the process of taking things out of the house so as not to let Mark have them. Eventually, we got everything loaded, and as Mark was finishing up with the police, I was paying off the laborers and telling them to get lost. It cost plenty, but it was worth it. They had really earned their money, make no mistake about it. "Here you are, gentlemen," I said. "Good job. Thank you very much. Now goodbye. You never saw us." As an aside, the next day I got a phone call from my credit card company asking about some strange transactions. When I rattled off the list of what I had spent money on, they said, "Oh, never mind." The cops waited and held Viktor to give us a good 15 minutes head start before they would let him go. Mark and I had to take the rental car back to the airport before we headed back north. About a block from the airport, it finally dawned on me just what we had done. Up until that point, I was sort of on autopilot and taking care of things moment by moment. I hadn't had time to reflect on the big picture. This was a caper that could have gone horribly wrong. Getting Marks and my brains blown out, to say nothing of the police officers, was an absolute possibility, what with the small arsenal of guns in that apartment, and the unbalanced man who possessed them. I was so overcome with what we had just accomplished and the metaphorical bullet that we had dodged that I got dizzy. I had to stop the truck and get out for some air. I walked back to Mark in the car. He gave me one of those "what a ready" looks. "We did it!" I shouted. "Oh my God, we did it!" With that, I got back into the truck so we could drop off the rental car and begin the drive back to San Francisco. After we got rid of the rental car and started to get on the freeway, I suddenly felt faint. "Mark, do you realize that we've only had biscotti and pretzels on the plane? I can't go any further until I get something to eat." So, after a quick stop at the In-N-Out Burger, we headed up I-5 to San Francisco. In the next episode, we get to see how unpredictable crazy people can be. Thanks for listening. I'd like to thank BearWorldMagazine.com for sponsoring this podcast. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Play. If you have questions, you can reach me through the website allgrownupnow.com. You can follow me on Instagram at Kenneth D. King, on Facebook at Kenneth D. King Design, or on my main website, KennethDKing.com.